to all, and welcome to another evening of discussion with the Trade and Economic Division of the Economics Department of the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine. As you would be aware, TEDU has these regular sessions on a Friday evening, and we discuss several issues of relevance to Trinidad and Tobago and the region. This evening, we are going to discuss tourism, and I am your moderator, Anthony Gonzalez. We have a star-studded panel. I've just been looking at their short series, and I'll introduce them in a short while. But let me first of all thank TEDU for inviting me to chair this session and say that the subject we have chosen is a very, very useful one, especially at this stage. It's a topic that we talk a lot about on our chats, and I think it's time for us to flesh it out a bit more. I tend to feel this subject has come to the fore because we have been trying to see to what extent our tourism is competitive and to what extent it could be considered critical for the future. I think while Caribbean countries, especially those in the Northern Caribbean, have been in tourism for a long time, and it's hard to talk about their sustainability or their viability because they have been there a long time. Those in the Southern Caribbean have, with the exception of Barbados, have now been trying to start the industry, Guyana, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago, and Dominica, and so forth. And as such, we need to try to understand a bit better to what extent the region would be competitive or would continue to be competitive in the light of the developments that we see taking place in the industry. We can talk a lot about what's happening in the world of technology, how technology is influencing the tourism industry. We know a lot about what has been happening with digital technology in terms of its impact on tourism. We can talk about how the world is changing in terms of our income, the countries with high levels of income that have traditionally supplied us with tourism, for example, the United States, Great Britain and Europe and so forth. How things are changing with China rising now to be a great power as well as a high-income country, as well as other countries in the rest of the world, Brazil and so forth. How is that going to impact of tourism? And we can talk about certainly other things which are impacting on competitiveness. For example, we can talk, as Professor Moore will discuss, for example, the impact of climate change, very important in terms of how it's impacting on tourism worldwide, as we can see, for example, in Southern Europe with the heat that occurs there during the summer months now. So I'm very pleased to introduce to you a very important panel. We're going to proceed in terms of a short presentation by Dr. Poon, who will do about 15 minutes, and then the others 3 will do 10 minutes. And we'll try to keep some time for discussion. I think I tend to emphasize this whenever I chair this panel, because I think we have a lot of people who follow this discussion and they would like to make some observation and some comments. So let's leave some comments, some time for discussion. So I'll be pretty rigorous in terms of trying to ensure that people stick to the time. So we want to start off with Dr. Uliana Poon. And let me say that Dr. Poon is a pioneering economist and business leader. She heads Leve Global, and has founded multiple ventures, including Tourism Intelligence International, and founded Being Sustainable. She has done a number of consultancies with various organizations around the world, too numerous to mention. She has been influential in terms of tourism strategies in South Africa, Mozambique, and other places. She also played a very important part in terms of the tourism strategy for Dominica and some of the other islands of the Caribbean. She's been a senior economist at the Caribbean Tourism Organization, and she is well known in the area for her contribution to the tourism industry. So it was a great pleasure that I hand you over to Dr. Poon. Dr. Poon.
Thank you very much. I would start by saying buenas tardes, guten Abend, buonasera, bonsoir, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. and to share with you some of my thoughts on how tourism is developing and how we can make it, I wouldn't say great again, but how we can make it make a difference with it. So just by starting, I'm sharing my screen. Are you all seeing?
Yes.
Are you seeing my
Yes,
screen?
yes, I'm seeing it.
Yes. Okay, great. Okay, wonderful. All right, just by telling you very quickly who we are Leve Global. We have been elevating tourism, trade, and lives around the world for the past 30 years in more than 100 countries and 300 clients all over the world. Our reputation at Leve Global, we've earned a reputation for research, analysis, and consultation that's often exhaustive. Our research publications have been read and known all over the world. But we are results-oriented and not merely task-oriented because we insist that good intelligence must lead to practical advice, clever competitive strategies, innovative solutions to well-defined problems and guidelines to put them in place. So of course, we would have developed the responsible tourism strategy for the new South Africa post-Mandela. In Jamaica, we developed their national export strategy. Also for Mozambique, we have done similarly the national strategy for, and just to tell you how we use intelligence to help countries. In Mozambique, they had a problem with cashews. It was too soft. So one of the things we suggested is that they produce cashew milk, which is one of the most expensive. Sandals, for example, had a great deal of trouble in the early 90s when business was low. And we advised them to do very similar to what the cruise lines and what the tour operators in Europe did. In other words, they never made money from transporting passengers or housing the clients. They made money from everything customers did when they got to the destination. So Sandals, for example, formed island routes. So we're also taking our own advice. As you know, we have the Being Estate Villas in Tobago, which we have developed over the last 20 years. Actually, it's seven suites on 12 acres of land. It's eco-elegant, individual, authentically Caribbean, no noise, no traffic, no neighbors, just you and nature. And of course, we've launched Exceptional Caribbean because we believe that the Caribbean has it all and it's the most amazing place to live, work, and play. Now, let's start by the basics. What is tourism? It's more than heads and beds and bums and seats, basically. Tourism is life. Tourism is every single thing a person does away from home for over 24 hours. We're talking about eating, sleeping, working. So tourism is sports, it's entertainment, it's education, it's the environment, it's travel, it's learning, it's data, it's R&D, it's infrastructure, it's all of these elements, basically. And that's why there are so many types of tourism, from adventure tourism to business tourism, cultural tourism, sports tourism, wellness tourism, so many types of it from the demand side. And from the supply side, from boats, cruise, cars, mountains, beaches, every single aspect of life, the entire environment is actually involved in the tourism value chain. And on the human side, so many different jobs from architects, engineers, receptionists, consultants, lawyers, are all involved. Web developers, designers, event planners are involved in this tourism industry. But the most significant opportunity for tourism in the Caribbean lies in the engagement of our creative classes. And I'll give you an example. For example, you have different job categories that our artists, our entertainers, talents that people have naturally can be engaged in this whole tourism industry and this tourism business. And just to give you an example, these are the tourists of old. These are tourists, who went to the same destinations. They couldn't care where they went to, they went to the same place, same hotel, ate at the hotel dining room, swam at the hotel swimming pool. They didn't care where they went. Once they could have shown others that they had been. But the new travelers now, these are the new customers. These are travelers. These are real estate agents from the United States that are having the experience of a lifetime. And the point about it is that the only limit to tourism is the imagination. We have to innovate, we have to invent, and we have to be extremely creative, and we need to engage our creative classes. Now, tourism today is radically different. We're talking about, the Southern Caribbean having to do tourism, but at the end of the day, the tourism that we're developing today is fundamentally different from that of the old. There's a paradigm shift taking place in the tourism industry. globally, as a matter of fact. In the past, finance was the be-all and end-all of the entire industry, of the entire world. Then came the economy, then society, and then the planet. Today, the planet is the center of everything we do, followed by society, economy, and the finance is taken backseat. Now, every 50 to 60 years, as you know, as economists, there's what we call creative gales of destruction. And we've passed through 6 of these waves. And all tourism is really part of the mass production wave that was fueled by oil. We're in the 5th information wave. And of course, the 6th wave is the age of intelligence. But the world is changing. It's not business as usual. Some players are winning, others are dying, or I would say others are using. Because we use the word using as being consumers of drugs and so, but quite frankly, Facebook and social media are very addictive as well. So they're users. So companies like Kodak, for example, 160,000 employees in 1997, they no longer exist. There's Mercedes-Benz, das werden wir nicht lassen. We're not going to stop doing this because the Japanese came on the market with more fuel-efficient cars. They had to fire 200,000 people and change the way they do business. Now Tesla's come on board with electric engines. And of course, there's a danger that the German car industry can be wiped out if they do not reinvent themselves. And of course, would you believe today Tesla is more valuable than the entire German industry put together? But what business is Tesla in actually? You think they're in electric vehicles? Tesla is in the business of data. Data is the new oil. Think about it. When you're on Facebook or Google and you do a couple of searches, Google or Facebook knows you better than your own partner. Imagine all of the data that's been collected when you drive, what you look at, how you stop, how you drive, and all of those things. And as a matter of fact, the biggest revenue earning companies are the data companies from Apple, Facebook, Google, you name it. That's where it's at. So with this paradigm shift, this whole mass standardized one-size-fit-all approach is no longer best practice. Remember the days of Ford, you can get any car you want once it was black. Once it was the same, we did tourism no different from the way Ford made its automobiles. But to stay relevant, we have to constantly change. We need to innovate. We need to dream big, use technologies, and use networks. In fact, we need to rethink, reimagine, reinvest, reposition. But very critically, what is causing this paradigm shift? And this is a fundamental change because the customers themselves, we the customers, we are driving this change. Technologies are facilitating it. The environment is limiting growth. Locals are more and more demanding, and the countries have become more caring. The balance of power is shifting. The almighty customers, as we call them, are the single most important influence on a company's success. Customers themselves are radically changing. There are demographic shifts, geographic shifts, and psychographic shifts when we talk about customers. Of course, people are living longer. And consider that in the United States, adults 65 years and older account for 16% of the population, but 80% of COVID deaths. Over time, the population, they're getting older and older. We are getting older and older. Of course, you have the young and restless, the Gen Zs are on the ball with it. The geographic shifts are also important because Asia is rising. They're the new kids on the block. China is really growing tremendously. However, the non-traditional markets are very different from the Western markets that we have grown used to. Western markets wanted sun, sand, and sea. Of course, the non-traditional markets want other assets, including sex, of course, but they want sightseeing, they want shopping, and they want status. So, and companies such as KFC, for example, are adapting to their customer taste. So you have halal KFC. And of course, in India, where they don't eat beef, you have Maharaji Max. So if we don't cater to our customers and target and understand who they are, we're going to lose it. The psychographic shifts, how people think, feel, and behave are probably the most important ones. Life expectancy are rising, but we are spending more time in poor health. Global health expenditures rising. The most unhealthy item on that photo sitting is a new pandemic because 8 million people died from a sedentary lifestyle compared to 7 million who died from COVID, for example. Obesity is a growing concern. People are pushing back. They're becoming more health conscious. You would have heard about the billionaire Brian Johnson, who is 50 going on 30 and trying to turn life backwards. So people are a taste of the slow food movement. They want fresh, they want organic, they want natural. So customers are changing from going on holiday to do something they want to become. They want to be transformed. They're not just buying a product, but they want to buy in. They used to buy products or services. They want transformative experiences. They're not just consuming, they're contributing. They don't just want to participate, they want to partner. So technology is also facilitating change. The global paradigm shift is also a facilitator of that. Billions are using social media. They're disruptive and they change the way we think, feel, and behave. The largest store, you know, is the Amazon. Largest taxi company is Uber. The largest hotel company is Airbnb. And of course, AI is taking the world by storm. ChatGPT had 100 million users in 2 months. The environment is limiting growth. And as we know, climate is changing. Global warming is real. Greenpeace is active, you know, and we really have to be concerned about the environment. The rainforest is on fire. This planet of plastics. Because there's no plan B. Every sector will be affected by climate change. Locals, we are very demanding because we are in the know. And what is very interesting is that exactly what the locals want is exactly what we want. A comfortable life, safety and security, clean air, pristine environment, well-being, fun and enjoyment, respect for local culture and heritage. And of course, countries are becoming more caring. And in summary, tourism is a critical engine of growth for Caribbean economies. It's not a matter of if, when, or but. The choice right now is whether we let tourism happen to us or whether we make tourism happen. But all tourism wouldn't work. We need to develop a tourism that is inclusive, where local communities and people are involved and benefit from tourism, that's innovative, that's not same old, that's data and intelligence driven, that is sustainable, and that is resilient. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Poon. I think this is precisely what we needed at the start. We needed to get an overview of the change that is taking place in the industry so that we can get some perspective of where the industry is heading. I think that sets the stage for us to discuss further. I would think that you have a lot more to say, but we have confined you just to 15 minutes. But I'm sure you'll get a chance later on in the discussion to come back. But thanks again for at least giving us that overall perspective, which allows us to be able to understand better this paradigm shift. I now move on to Professor Winston Moore. Professor Winston Moore is the Deputy Principal of the Cavell campus of the University of the West Indies in Barbados. He has a distinguished career in economics. He has published over 100 peer-reviewed articles. I know particularly in the field of trade where I operate, his work is very well known. He has received a lot of citations, I guess over 1,000 citations for his work, which indicates to what extent his work has been influential in the discourse. And he has played several leadership roles in the university. He was, before becoming the deputy principal, he was head of the graduate studies and research. And before that, he was head of the Department of Economics. So he's well known among us and well known in the field, and we're certainly glad to have him here tonight. So over to you, Professor Moore.
Okay, thank you very much. So you can confirm with me that you can see my screen, my presentation?
Yes, I'm seeing it, yes.
Okay, excellent. So thank you very much. I'm very happy to be part of this panel. And what I'm going to investigate this evening is based on a number of my papers that I've published over the years. I've been looking at this issue of climate change and tourism from a number of different perspectives, looking at how it impacts on the features, how it impacts on the supply side. So I'll give you a little bit of a snapshot of my research. And if you want to delve into the details a little bit more, you can always visit maybe my ResearchGate page or my Google Scholar page and really download the papers and delve into them a little bit more. First of all, looking at the contribution of tourism and to GDP and capital investment, we can obviously see why this industry is considered so important in the Caribbean. Looking at the contribution to GDP as well as the contribution to capital investment, it is essentially larger than any other region across the entire world. So in the Caribbean, the contribution to GDP is around 14%, and that is a direct contribution. If you take into account the indirect contribution, that number is even larger. And it also makes a significant contribution to capital investment in each Caribbean island, as well as we build hotel plant, as we build out the tourism infrastructure. We see a significant contribution to investment. So this is essentially why we're holding today's session and why tourism is considered so important in the region. Now, why am I focused on climate change and its impact on tourism? There are a number of different aspects to this relationship between climate and tourism. And these are just a couple of things that I pulled out to illustrate the relationship between climate and tourism. If you look first at wind, wind obviously has a significant impact on our infrastructure. So every year we're visited by, unfortunately, we're visited by hurricanes and tropical storms in the region. And these can have a significant impact on the infrastructure of many tourism establishments and tourism plans as well. And it can also has an impact on the safety of tourists. So wind is a very critical factor. Even without a storm, if you have very high winds, it can blow down, the tourists, their beach umbrella. It can make it really uncomfortable for them if they're on the beaches around the Caribbean as well. So it's a significant factor to take into account when you're looking at tourism. And then rain is a really important characteristic. If you look at the tourism and the tourism arrivals throughout the Caribbean, you will find that many tourists come to the region when we have less rain, which is a little bit problematic because it therefore puts stress on our water supplies. But they come to the region during that time because they don't want rain to impact on their vacation. So rain can essentially be considered an annoyance to the typical holiday travelers' vacation, and hence is the less rain for them, the better. And it can also impact on participation in activities. Obviously, if you can't really go on tours, you can't visit particular tourist attractions if it's raining and raining very heavily. And then temperature impacts on the comfort of the tourist in the destination, and it can really impact on enjoyment, because if temperature is really high, it makes it difficult for individuals to go outside and to really enjoy the destination as well. So these are just a few aspects that show there is this link between climate and climatic features and tourism. And it's probably important for me to mention that when I use the term climate, I'm not referring to the day-to-day fluctuations in these variables. I'm referring to the long-run trends in these variables. So maybe the 30, the 50, the 100-year trends in these variables is what I'm referring to when I use the term climate and climate change. One of the things that economists and researchers in the area of tourism have done is that they've therefore developed what is considered a tourism climate index, because given this potential link between climatic features and tourism, it therefore makes sense to see how we can model the changes in the climatic features and how those impact on whether or not it would support the tourism industry. So I have here the most popular index that has been utilized in the literature, and I've published a couple of papers on this area, the Tourism Climate Index. And it's built up of 5 key variables: the Daytime Comfort Index, the Daily Comfort Index, precipitation or rainfall, sunshine, and wind. So I'm going to go from the bottom and go up to the top, because the ones at the bottom are a little bit simpler to explain. Obviously, wind, if you have more wind, it makes it uncomfortable for the tourists, and it makes their outdoor activities somewhat problematic. But it can also cool down the relatively hot conditions. So it's not necessarily a linear relationship. It can actually have positive impacts on for the tourist destination as well. Sunshine, the more total hours of sunshine, it therefore allows the tourists to explore the country a lot more and engage in more tourist activities. So this is a really important contribution to the tourism destination as well. Precipitation has a negative impact on outdoor activities and therefore holiday enjoyment. So that is also included in the index as an indicator of the comfort or enjoyment that the visitor obtains from the destination. And then the other two indices, the daytime comfort index and the daily comfort index, are essentially temperature indicators. The daytime comfort index is built up of like your maximum and minimum daily temperature and humidity. And then the daily comfort index is made up of the means. So that captures the temperatures over the entire day, over a 24-hour period. And essentially what you do is that you weight these indices, and the weighting of these indices provides you an indicator of provides like a tourism features of the destination. I'm going to show you what that looks like when we create this for a particular destination. Now, I've sort of simplified it a little bit because the actual calculation is a little bit more complicated because, as I said, there is some interaction between these variables. So there is an interaction between wind and daytime comfort, so that if you have really high temperatures, but you have a fair bit of wind, that can cool down the destination a little bit. So that interaction is also considered when you're building the tourism comfort index. But for the purposes of today's discussion, this presentation is perfectly fine, and it gives you an idea of what we're doing when we calculate the tourism climate index. Now, once you've calculated the index, you then do some ranking, and the scores go from -20 all the way up to 100. -20 would be those destinations that are impossible for tourism, and ideal destinations would have a score of 100, but very good destinations would be around 70, and good destinations will be around 60. And that's the zone that you'll find a lot of Caribbean destinations would land in. So I've plotted this for the Caribbean. So the black line is the line I want to start with. So the black line is the historical tourism climate index for the region. So you'll see that in those periods, January to April, in fact, we can include December to April is when the tourism climate index is at its highest. It's over 60. I remember we said earlier that anything over 60 is considered good, anything over 70 is considered very good. But what you find in the other months between May and October is that then the destination becomes a lot less, or destinations within the Caribbean become less hospitable for tourism. So it becomes a lot hotter. We also know that you get a lot more extreme wind, and these conditions make tourism destinations a lot less attractive during those summer months as well. So it explains why we have this sort of seasonal pattern in tourism, because it is actually a lot more attractive to come to the region during the December to April period. Now, what I also have included on this chart, and this is where the climate change aspect comes into play, is that I've calculated the tourism climate index under various climate change scenarios. And the climate change scenarios range from relatively moderate, which would be like the pink line, which would be considered the A2 scenario. So that would be maybe a slowdown in carbon emissions. And then the extreme scenario, which will be the A1, which will be if we continue along our current trend in relation to carbon emissions. And you can see that as a result, under all of these scenarios, under all of these various climate change scenarios, that tourism within the Caribbean becomes a lot less attractive. So it will become a lot hotter. during our tourism or traditional tourist period, and therefore it wouldn't necessarily be very attractive for tourists. And you're also sometimes going to see some shifts in terms of rainfall patterns as well. So it is going to make tourism a lot less attractive within the region. The paper that I did on this study actually suggests that some of the other regions that the Caribbean competes against, say the Mediterranean now, are going to become a lot more attractive for tourism. So you might see some shifting occurring from the Caribbean to the Mediterranean because they become a lot more attractive for tourism. So that's one of the things the region would have to look at. But there's more I could say about this, but I'll leave it for here and move on to some other features in relation to climate change. What I then did was I used those forecasts to see what will be the impact on tourism within the Caribbean. And one of the things that the researchers suggested is because the region is going to become less attractive to tourism, you're going to see a fall in tourism demand. There would also be a reduction in tourism expenditure as tourists maybe take shorter vacations. And some countries are going to see a larger or greater loss. So the impact of climate change is not going to be very linear or not going to be homogeneous across the entire Caribbean. Some Caribbean islands are going to be more impacted than other Caribbean islands. And that is something that we have to be cognizant of. Now, there's also the supply side effects. And the supply side effects would relate to things such as the sea level rise and hurricane activity. And sea level rise would lead to land loss, flooding, and these things impact on your hotels. And then the hurricane activity also has a direct impact on hotels as well. So what I would have done in one of my studies, I sort of did some scenarios and crunched the numbers, and this was for Barbados. It suggested that under a couple of scenarios, I provided 5 scenarios. Obviously, scenario 1 is the best case and scenario 5 is the worst case scenario. It does have some significant impacts of climate change, will have some significant impacts on the percentage of establishments affected. So the number of establishments affected range from 13% to 68 or almost 70%. And this would therefore result in losses of around 9,000 jobs in Barbados. That's almost 1/5 of the employed labor force, and lead to a significant loss in terms of value added as well for the country. I also did some calculations for hurricanes as well, and you can also read upon this in my research. What I want to do, though, is finish up by looking at the adaptation and climate adaptation options that we can look at in the Caribbean, because we're looking at sustainability. And there are a number of things we have to look at within the Caribbean to make tourism a lot more sustainable going forward in the future. We have to make our tourism plan a lot more resilient. So this includes designing our tourism plans to be a lot more resilient to higher wind speeds, the construction of water storage tanks, irrigation networks that utilize recycling of wastewater, and then also more large-scale projects such as artificial reefs to help with the coastlines, and also the introduction of alternative attractions beyond just sun, sea, and sand are really important adaptations to climate change. The implications of this, however, is that we will need finance to support these adaptation options. These adaptation options are not going to be cheap. So we need to start early, but we also need to find financing to support these adaptation options within the region. So I'm going to stop here for now, and hopefully I'll take some questions a little bit later on. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Moore. I think you did a marvelous job in trying to explain such a complex subject in 10 or 15 minutes. You have quite a lot inside of that presentation, and I'm sure you could do with a lot more time to explain all those variables that you have in those models. But thanks again. I think you gave us an interesting insight into the impact that climate change could have. I personally have not really given much thought to it, except for what I read in the newspapers. But certainly I could see from what you mentioned in terms of temperature, wind, rain and so forth, the impact that these things could have. I think certainly some of your recommendations need to be carefully studied, and we need to really go much further into this. And I do hope that at some point in time we can come back to this in a more in-depth way. So thanks again for that presentation. And now we move on to our next presentation from Dr. Kola Lewis Cameron. Dr. Lewis Cameron is a senior lecturer as well as dean of the Faculty of Social Science at the University of the West Indies at St. Augustine. She's also chair of the Tourism Standing Committee and the Strategic and Sustainable Development of Tourism. She has done an MSc in Hospitality and Tourism from the University of Surrey, and she has been teaching tourism strategy and tourism planning, which has given her a very useful experience in terms of being able to provide advice in this particular field. She has also written quite a bit in terms of tourism policy, and she edits an important journal or text on marketing island destinations, concepts, and cases concepts and cases. She's been also the co-author of the text Caribbean Tourism Concepts and Cases. So I hand you over now to Dr. Kola Lewis Cameron. Please, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, all. I want to thank Oleana and Winston for setting the context for what I have been asked to share on this evening, which is practical steps to increasing tourism activity, specifically in Trinidad. And I will approach this by, first of all, just touching a little bit on the whole issue of what is really tourism economic viability. I want to share with you briefly as well, what is the context that we operate in terms of the tourism space, both from a regional perspective, but focusing primarily on the Trinidad context. And then to share just 4 practical steps that we can engage in if we are to increase tourism activity in Trinidad. And I want to start by making the point that we are living in what we can call existential times, where crises are more frequent. And of course, Winston would have spoken specifically about climate change. These crises are lasting longer, and the negative impacts seem to be more detrimental as the years go by. And when we're thinking about island economies that are in large part dependent on tourism, we have to face the pressing issue of, well, how can we make tourism a more viable sector in these uncertain times? And even to go as far as to ensure the socioeconomic survival of the region. And at the outset, I think it's important for us to clarify, as I said, what is meant by tourism viability or tourism economic viability. And there are 5 things to note. 1, we are pursuing local prosperity, where we want to ensure that there is maximization of visitor spend in the economy, and of course, an increase in the amount of visitor spend that actually remains in the economy. We're also pursuing employment quality. So we are after increasing the number of employment opportunities as well as the quality of jobs generated by tourism. Thirdly, when we're talking about viability, we're talking about economic benefits. So increased foreign exchange, attracting foreign direct investment, encouraging investment in new infrastructure, etc. We are also looking at having the appropriate infrastructure and services to support tourism. And then, of course, we are after sustainable use of available resources. And at the core of all of this is ensuring that the visitors have a memorable and satisfying experience that, of course, leads to these 3 elements. So this is our pursuit when we're talking about tourism economic viability. And so what we have to consider, given this pursuit of economic viability, we have to consider what is the context within which tourism operates. And I want to highlight a couple of things. And first of all, start from a general sort of Caribbean perspective and then drill down into the Trinidad context. So first of all, in general, what we see is that tourism linkages generally with local economies in the region tend to be very weak. And so the overall tourism multiplier for the Caribbean is far below the world average. Another observation in a general sense is that tourism governance in the Caribbean tends to be generally weak. And this is characterized by low levels of technical capacity. Of course, we have the budget funding in national and subnational tourism institutions, challenge, as well as a situation that hinders coordination, of course, with the private sector. We also have problems of insufficient participation by local communities as an issue that we see across the region, low levels of interagency coordination, and an excessive dependence on fiscal incentives to stimulate private investment. And so we are seeing this picture emerging throughout the region. And then nearer home in a local context, what we observe as well is that, and this might be a controversial statement, but tourism has no political legitimacy, right? It is one of those sectors that is talked about, is referred to, but you haven't seen that sort of commitment to fully develop the sector to its true potential. And linked to this, what has resulted is that tourism tends to be treated as tokenism for diversification. So you will hear the word touted, we need to diversify, we need to diversify. And tourism is identified as one of the sectors, but of course not given the requisite backing to take it to the level that, of course, at the level certainly of its Caribbean neighbors. And as a result of that, what we've noticed in the local context is that there tends to be a constant shifting of the priorities for tourism. Of course, today there is a focus on business tourism. And then, of course, in another season, you would find that the emphasis shifts to whether it be ecotourism, and then you will hear sport tourism. And so there is a constant shifting of the priorities, which of course is another factor that defines the context that we find ourselves in locally. And so I think it's important when you're talking about practical steps to increasing tourism activity that you have to understand your context, because of course how you respond is stymied or encouraged by the context that you find yourself in. So I want to proffer just a couple practical steps that we can consider given this landscape that has been presented. And the first practical step I want to suggest is that, particularly for Trinidad, we need to get settled. And what I mean by that is that the government needs to make a decision once and for all on the role of tourism in sustaining the local economy in these existential times, right? And should it be considered as a priority sector for meaningful development, then this decision must be supported by a clear vision that is communicated at every level of society. We cannot be vacillating as to whether or not we should consider tourism. Make a decision once and for all. This vision must be not just stated, but supported by the requisite funding. Not a situation where the tourism institutions constantly have to come cap in hand for funding, but the vision must be supported by a budget that, of course, can deliver on the relevant vision. And the appropriate enabling environment must be created to attract relevant investment. And then, of course, the strengthening of the capacities of the tourism institutions is critical so that they can successfully lead the sector at all levels. And then finally, in terms of this whole point about getting settled, there must be support for formulating sector policies and programs that would help to determine shared public and private sector objectives. So in addition to getting settled, another critical step for Trinidad in particular is that we need to get smart. And by getting smart, what I mean is that technology and ICTs must be leveraged, leading to a smart experience for the visitor. And this is one which enhances the tourist experience through personalization, context awareness, and real-time monitoring. And what does this mean in a practical sense? Just a couple of points there. One, there has to be an increase in the use of digital platforms and technologies amongst tourism business operators. And this is critical because it will increase the visibility of the individual operator as well as the destination. And of course, make it more convenient and easy for potential visitors to book experiences with the destination. The fundamental point here is that if you are not online, you are not on sale. And so you cannot have a disconnect between what the destination management organization is doing in terms of promoting the destination online, and then your tourism operators are not visible, they are not accessible, or what is promoted online is not at the acceptable quality. And so there has to be synergy between the digital strategy of the digital marketing strategy of the destination, complemented by what the operators are doing in the digital space. And so practically, that means that you must ensure that the local tourism businesses have regularly updated websites, active social media platforms where visitors can easily gain product or service information, verify accuracy via reviews, and book experiences in real time. And this may require some sort of monitoring or a product development unit, whether it be in the ministry or any tourism agency, in order to coordinate that effort. And then, of course, there has to be an encouragement of local tourism suppliers to facilitate and accommodate online payments for tourism products and services. And I mean, in this, using a digital platform is critical for e-commerce to make it easy for the consumer. There has to be an integration of the use of AI as a supporting tool for businesses to improve customer service delivery for visitors, right? There are a lot of opportunities to be gained by using AI to improve efficiency. And all of the above, of course, will require training and capacity building for relevant stakeholders. And of course, that can be facilitated, I am suggesting, through a collaboration with major training providers on the island, including COSTAT, including UTT, and the UWI, in order to partner with the tourism agency and the ministry to facilitate this capacity building. Also, the provision of grants, as was done in the case of Tobago when Tobago launched its digital campaign, would be very useful to assist particularly the small operators to ensure that there is a appropriate digital presence. Government can also provide incentives to small or micro tourism enterprises for destination marketing. For example, tax deduction for all online promotion or advertising. So the point here is that we need to get smart. Thirdly, we need to get data. Oleana mentioned it earlier, data is the new oil. Right? The weakness of our tourism intelligence system has led us to excessive dependence on a small number of small markets, small source markets, which creates vulnerabilities for the sector. So what we've noticed is that we are heavily dependent, for example, on the diaspora, and very few source markets for quite a number of years. And so What is required at this juncture, of course, is developing robust market intelligence that can help us to identify trends in tourism supply and demand. Uliana spoke at length about all the demographic shifts that are taking place. We need market intelligence to provide a better understanding of this new tourist, a better understanding of the structure of their spending in each segment of tourism demand, as well as its relationship with the destination economy and the local multiplier effect. So improved market knowledge facilitates more effective identification and prioritization of investments to address the determinants of travel decisions. And then, of course, investing in collecting and accessing relevant industry research can assist destinations in better understanding the patterns as well as the preferences of our key target markets. And of course, that will help us to ensure that our experiences are well calibrated to meet the needs of our tourists. And then finally, we need to get linked. And by that, I mean, there has to be an intersectoral approach to tourism product development. And Winston mentioned it. I think it's the adaptation option that you referred to it as, which can contribute to increased competitiveness of the sector. So what getting linked means is that you need to join two sectors, which provides access to more grants and reaping the benefits of growing two sectors. It allows us to expand the destination's offering and provide unique products, allowing us to attract a more diversified target audience. So what do we mean by getting linked? We mean combining two sectors. So for example, agritourism, we talk about it a lot, we mention it as an option, but it must be an approach that is adopted in a serious manner. So you have agritourism, you have examples such as edu-tourism, combining education and tourism, agriculture and tourism. You can even go as far as petro-tourism, the energy industry with tourism. You have creative tourism. So there are so many options available, but it's all about, as was mentioned earlier, innovation is key. What are the sectors that are growing within the destination that we can actually combine and allow for a new type of experience, new markets that we can explore, and of course creating that competitive edge for the destination. So practical steps: get settled, get smart, get data, and get linked. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lois Cameron. I can certainly identify with what you're saying there, because I've been around for quite a number of years, and I've been talking about tourism, I believe, since about the 1970s, when we regarded tourism here as servitude at the time of Dr. Williams. It was heretical to mention tourism here in the public sector. And so what you're saying there comes like music to my ears, in the sense that I appreciate all the observations and the frustrations that you find in dealing with tourism in this local market here. I think a lot of it, I've put up a lot of it down to this question of Dutch disease in Trinidad, the whole phenomenon of oil and gas and the impact that has. And to me, we have not really exploited the tourism potential of this country, simply because of the fact that we had alternatives and we went ahead and we exploited the other alternatives. And I agree certainly with you that we need to look at it in a very practical way and get serious about it. I'm hoping that, given the current situation in terms of what's happening in oil and gas, that we may begin to look at it more seriously now for the first time, and something may come out of it. But I certainly welcome your comments. I think it certainly shows us a direction in which we can go, which could help develop this particular sector. So thank you very much for that presentation. Moving on, I go to Professor Roger Hossain. Professor Hossain is the coordinator of this unit, the Trade and Economic Development Unit of the Department of Economics at St. Augustine. He has published widely. I think he has over 100 papers and several books. I think he has over about 10 books, and she has published on various aspects of trade and development in the region. One of his books was recently nominated for an international prize. He has consulted heavily throughout the region for numerous regional organizations. I think too numerous for me to mention: the CARICOM Secretariat, the CDB, the OTM, and as well as international organizations like the World Bank, the WTO, IDB, and so on and so forth. So he has worked a lot with various regional and international organizations, and he has worked as well with multinational corporations like Repsol and BPTT and so forth. At present, right now, I think he's pursuing research on the question of non-energy exports and immigrant economics. And certainly we're seeing pieces coming out from him on those particular areas. I think he's also doing some work on China and India. So I want to ask him now to make his presentation. It will be very interesting to hear what he has to say on tourism as an engine of foreign exchange generation in Trinidad and Tobago. So over to you, Roger.
Okay, good night, and thanks for the opening comments, Prof. I think my presentation follows smoothly from Winston, Oliana, and Akola, and I think they are well linked. So I will contextualize the Trinidad and Tobago economy. I think it is best to understand where we are located in production space. And for the benefit of the people who may not have joined this seminar in the past, the point A in production space is about 1996, before Trinidad and Tobago started LNG production. The point B is where we should have been. The point C is really where we were at about 2014, except the way we spent our money on transfers and subsidies forced the economy, because of a decline in the labor force participation rate and other inefficiencies, down to a point such as D. And then with the decline in gas and the arrival of the Venezuelan immigrants, we have drifted to a point such as E. And really, this point E is one that has put the Trinidad and Tobago economy under a lot of strain. If you were to take the difference between gross official reserves and external public sector debt, it is now very small, in the sense that if one were to take the conservative view that the difference between debt and reserves gives you an indication of your economic health in some aspects, then we are struggling. And it is against the background of this difference between the stock of reserves and external debt that the tourism sector becomes even more important. And it was very interesting. I think it was Akola who mentioned tokenism. It's very interesting to see that perspective coming out from Akola in the sense that that's what seems to be going on in Trinidad and Tobago. For many, many years, I heard Professor Gonzalez mention the Dutch disease, and for sure, it seems to be a case of, well, we had so much money that we basically ignored the revenue earning potential from that this sector. Now, I looked at some of the data, and I calculated some percentage changes between 1995 and 2024, and 2019 and 2024. And as you can see, with the green bars, Trinidad and Tobago has had one of the lowest performance in terms of growth over the long wave period, 95 to 2024. And from 2019 to 2024, only Cuba did worse than us in that time period. I'm using scaled up data for 2024 from the tourism analytics. Now, when we look at Carnival, we observe that visitor arrival traffic for Carnival is a bit down as compared to previous years, but average visitor expenditure is on the rise. And I think that's something that the government can keep in mind, because once we do enough to get visitor arrival traffic for Carnival back up to where it was before 2020, we should try as best as we could to keep average visitor expenditure up as well, and that way generate even more foreign exchange from this source. Now, in terms of Carnival expenditure, you can see that, well, overall, we are basically back to the type of income we were generating before 2021, when we had no Carnival, and 2020 we were lucky enough to have Carnival, and then the COVID outbreak took place, and 2019. So our numbers are going back up in that regard. And this is an idea of where the Carnival expenditure by visitors takes place. So, you know, when you look at this, you as economists, we would keep thinking, so, okay, what can we do to double entertainment expenditure even more, to increase accommodation and meals expenditure even more? And it was interesting to see and to hear Akola mention the low tourism multiplier in the region. Because certainly one of the things we have to work on in Trinidad and Tobago, given this extremely bad foreign exchange situation, is the tourism multiplier. And, you know, whilst it's well documented, I simply use a scatter plot here to show the relationship between overnight visitors and real GDP growth. And it's, you know, there is potential for economic growth to in some form be linked to visitor arrival traffic overnight, visitor arrival traffic, and something we therefore need to build on. I filtered out the trend component and the cyclical component from the overall variable. And one of the things that policymakers would have to pay attention to is that the current upsurge in tourism traffic to Trinidad and Tobago could be because of cyclicality, almost kind of like revenge tourism. Okay, so for 2 years we locked down the world, I'm going to enjoy traveling, and because the trend component is definitely showing signs of moving downwards. Now, these are just some hypothetical, you know how you have the Big Mac index, where we use this as a kind of slightly light-hearted way to look at exchange rates. I looked at some light-hearted numbers given our foreign exchange situation, and if we could increase, Prof. Gonzalez, the number of tourists visiting Trinidad and Tobago from about 400,000 to 2.6 million, which will take a lot of work, we can meet 50% of average non-energy export.
Yes, hello? I think we have a problem. I've lost contact. Hello?
Hi, Dr. Gonzalez. I think Dr. Hussein just, yeah, let me just
You've lost
check.
contact with Roger?
Yes, just give me a second. Let me check on him.
Yes. Okay.
I came off there for a minute, Rebecca.
Yes,
Okay, yes. Okay, continue. Yeah, we're hearing you.
Did he come back on?
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
PowerPoint disappeared. Hold on, eh?
I think Roger is trying to get his PowerPoint back up.
Just 1 minute. It is not opening. I'm going to open it and come back onto it. So that should work there. No, I'll just have to speak to it to save time. But one of the things we have to work on is the relationship between homicides and international overnight visitors to Trinidad and Tobago. What I found when I looked at the data is after homicides cross 400,000, 400 per annum in Trinidad and Tobago, there tends to be a perverse impact on overnight visitors, and that's something that the policymakers would want to look at. And also, is there a way, and this is a question I'm throwing out to policymakers, that we could tap into the Notting Hill Carnival, the Toronto Carnival, the carnivals that take place throughout the world that are in some way derived or linked to West Indian and Trinidad and Tobago Carnival, and see if we could market our carnival through those international other events and attract people there to our carnival with foreign exchange capacity. I heard, I think it was Oliana and Akula who mentioned the importance of the diaspora. And I looked at the diaspora data, they have good purchasing power capability, and therefore that's a good market that we may need to tap deeper into, not just for carnival, to which they tend to visit, but the other aspects of our tourism that we mentioned. But the big stumbling block, I think, for Trinidad and Tobago really is, how do we push to attract more tourists into Trinidad and Tobago with this horrendous crime level? I think, now when you say that, some people would say to you that in Jamaica, there's a lot of tourists flowing into Jamaica and they have a very high crime level. And there's an old saying in Trinidad that, I think it's see poor luck is not John poor luck or something like that. And whilst it may happen in Jamaica and they may get some tourists, even though they have a high murder level, in Trinidad it may not work so, and therefore we cannot use this word that Akola mentioned, tokenism. We cannot have a tokenism type of approach to tourism. We need to have a solid approach to it to fetch foreign exchange, because when we look at the medium-term outlook, and I look until 2030, this year, the difference between the stock of reserves and external debt is about 150 million, down from about 9 billion in 2011 or thereabouts. So from 9 billion to 150 million. I suspect before the year end, it will be negative. And by 2027, that difference could be about minus 2 billion US. So I think we have to become aggressive in the pursuit of this tourism dollar, but with all the necessary interlinkages and all the necessary institutional support, because it might be our saving grace at this point in time, given the outlook for the energy sector in the medium term. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Roger. Well, I think Roger provided us with some useful information, in particular some useful data as to how we could improve our tourism flows. I think his focus was largely on earning foreign exchange, how in various aspects of tourism we could intervene to try and earn more foreign exchange. So he focused on Carnival and some other areas. There's some tremendous food for thought here as we go into this. I think certainly there are lots of questions that were raised, and certainly we'll come back to them in a short while. Now, we have had 4 presentations, and they have raised quite a number of questions. As a matter of fact, I think there are too many questions to be answered, and certainly not in the time that we have available to us, but let's see what we can do. I didn't get a chance to exactly check what is on the chat, but I hope to do so in a little while. I guess there are lots of interesting things that come to mind when we listen to the various presentations. I think starting with Oliana's presentation, there are some interesting insights as to where the industry is going and what we need to do to transform the industry in order to be able to capture these particular trends. There are some interesting points there that were made. I didn't note all of them, and to some extent, I've forgotten one or two of them, but certainly she raised some interesting insights as to how we can adapt to technology and various aspects of tourism. I think one of the things that she focused very fundamentally on is the variety of the various tourism sectors, something which we tend to overlook. That is to say, there are a lot of specific areas of tourism, and one could focus on them, and one could try to link them to make some kind of coherent strategy. I think certainly we would like to hear a little more on that. I would like to think that if you bring that to some kind of national application, let's say if we're applying that to a particular country like Dominica or Trinidad or so forth, exactly how we go about trying to identify those particular sectors in which you think that we do have that particular advantage. Mind you, I'm not a fan of government picking winners, and those of you who know me would have heard me said this over the years. And I tend to believe that the people on the ground who know these sectors would identify them and go after them. For instance, I tend to feel largely the private sector role in tourism needs to be highlighted, and they need to do a lot more in terms of organizing various aspects of tourism. But I would like, first of all, to start off the discussion by asking a number of questions I have. I will come back to what is on the chat. But let me start off by asking Oliana in the first place, what is the role she sees here for the private sector? Because I get the impression that we are largely talking about governments here, not in any way seriously about the private sector.
Thank you, Chair. Well, let me start by saying that it's a little bit unfortunate that, I mean, at the end of the day, we're talking about a $10 trillion industry that has 1.3 billion international arrivals and creating nearly 500 million jobs by 2035, we estimate. And it's only because now we have a little crunch with the foreign exchange thing, we're thinking tourism. I guess better late than never, but I think we need to start from the beginning, from the point of view that most people in Trinidad do not understand what tourism is. People think tourism is a hotel. And we do not understand that the entire economy, everybody is actually involved in the sector. And I think one of the points that Roger Hossain asked is, how do you get tourism rolling very, very quickly? To get tourism rolling very quickly, we have to get everybody on board. Everybody has to want tourism, to be happy about tourism, to be welcoming of tourism. And of course, the private sector has a critical role to play because that's the actual provider of the services. So the ministry or the government, they need to start talking to the private sector to see what exactly is required, what is needed. And I think people talk about public-private partnership. I would think public-private community partnerships. How do we get our communities involved? How do we activate them? How do we help them to benefit from tourism? Because if you don't get tourism in your pocket and on your table, you're going to steal from the tourists. And of course, yes, crime is a problem. But I mean, we're in a situation where we need to stop things. And what did Jamaica do? Create all-inclusive hotels so you keep people away from the crime places. But we need to start solving these problems critically. Cruise is a low-hanging fruit. We have the infrastructure, not a lot more is needed. But being creative about what is offered and positioning yourself to really capture some of the business is extremely important. So I would agree that with Akola that we need a very smart approach to tourism if we need to go anywhere with tourism. We can't do the same old tourism. Where is the Central Intelligence Agency for tourism? Who is collecting the data? Who is understanding who the travelers are? You know, come back home. I mean, what about campaigns? Come back home. And there are very, very lucrative sectors of the industry that we could be targeting: weddings, honeymoons, all kinds of stuff. But who is going to be doing it? And yes, if we're really serious about tourism, we need to decide this is where we want to go. But we need to get everybody on board, whether you're a lecturer or whether you are involved in tourism, whether you like it or not. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Oliana. Looking at the questions raised, I've seen Celeste Shariandi asking about community tourism, which I think to some extent, Oliana, you just answered, which is that you need to get the community involved in tourism, and government has to find a way to bring them in. She was asking this in relation to cruise tourism, which according to her did not bring many returns. I think to some extent you answered that, but you could come back at it later on. But let me go on to Professor Moore and ask about, Roger asked a question about how is Barbados planning to deal with what you have raised about climate change and its impact on tourism in Barbados. So it's a very specific question. I don't know if you have a reply on it at
What
this
I'll
point.
do is I'll speak about it from the Barbados perspective, and then sort of bring it home to the entire Caribbean. One of the things that Barbados has been doing for a while we've been trying to green the entire economy. And a couple of years ago, we did a green economy scope and study looking at how we could green the tourism industry further. So this involves looking at things such as waste management, looking at areas such as renewable energy, looking at the overall infrastructure of the plant, so including technology as well, to address issues in relation to how they deal with bookings and so on. And as was mentioned earlier, we didn't just focus on the hotel establishments, we look at the overall industry. So this included the restaurants, the tourists, the attractions as well, to see how we could potentially green those attractions. And what we found is that greening those attractions have actually been providing an opportunity for further improving the competitiveness of Barbados, because Barbados is a fairly expensive destination. So improving or including greening in the conversation has helped a lot of tourism destinations in Barbados. So when you come to Barbados, you'll find that some tourists, a lot of the tourist attractions have included some type of greening. So the Harson's Cave, if you go to Harson's Cave, which is one of more popular attractions, many of the trams, or all of the trams actually, are electrified. So we've moved away from fossil fuel-based vehicles to more electric vehicles, and that has reduced the cost, and it also has benefits in terms of CO2 emissions as well, and the environment. Many tourism establishments in Barbados, and many of the larger ones, for example, have incorporated wastewater recycling. They've also partnered with some of the waste recyclers in Barbados as well to reduce the amount of waste coming out of the plant. And this has actually allowed them to market themselves as green destinations. And the tourism literature suggests that these destinations, or these companies, or these hotels can actually benefit from a green premium. So they can therefore sell their rooms at a higher rate because they are now considered green. So greening is one of those adaptation options that we've been trying to incorporate within Barbados. And across the entire region, we've been trying to look at how we can better incorporate renewable energy. And the benefit of renewable energy is that renewable energy now is cheaper than fossil fuels. That wasn't the case a couple of years ago, but many sources of renewable energy, so for example, wind and PV, are currently coming in at a lower price point than traditional fossil fuels, and that therefore reduces the cost of production in many of the attractions, many of the hotels and restaurants in Barbados. So as we add more renewable energy to the grid, these entities are finding it more competitive to undertake activities in Barbados. And we have a really aggressive plan to incorporate renewable energy. We recently put out a tender for battery storage, utility scale battery storage in Barbados. And we're hoping to get some pretty good bids. And what that utility scale battery storage would do is that it would allow us to move the penetration rate of renewables in Barbados from around 10% to around 50% very quickly, because there's a lot of demand to put renewable energy onto the grid, but we really can't add too much too quickly because it would destabilize the grid without storage. So that storage would really help not only the tourism industry, but the supporting industries for tourism as well. So those are just a couple of things. We also have a really aggressive strategy in relation to the coastal and marine environment. And we just did a debt for nature swap, which is the swap is as part of that swap, we're going to be protecting the coastline, and that has a benefit for the tourism industry as well, and it has reduced our debt liabilities also. So we've been trying to use some really creative and innovative tools to support the tourism industry and support the economy in general.
Thank you very much for that insight. I see Professor Hossain has asked Dr. Lewis Cameron about the multiplier effect. He wants to know if you have any particular idea about that multiplier. What is it in Trinidad? And do you have an idea of the more tourism-dependent economies like Jamaica, what that tourism multiplier is like? It's a very specific question. I'm not sure you may have that data available at this point, but if you do, please let us know.
Yes, Roger, that is a very specific question. No, I don't have that data, but I do know that the information I shared in terms.
Yes, we have a problem, I see.
Of that.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Hear me? Oh.
Go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
Right.
Yes.
Yes, so that point about a low tourism multiplier in the region came from a IDB tourism sector framework that was done in 2022, where they observed that there was a comparison between the Caribbean and the other parts of the world in terms of multiplier effect. And the reason given for it really was the high leakages. Right? The fact that so many islands depend on imports to sustain the economy, to sustain the tourism sector rather, right? Because of the fact that, of course, we don't produce a lot of the raw material, if you like, that goes into tourism. So that is a challenge. And I saw it come up in the chat there about how can the issue of economic leakage be addressed. And it's one of those issues where the starting point is we will always have leakages just by virtue of the fact that where we are located and the fact that we are restricted in terms of our resources. The issue, of course, in terms of addressing that, at least on the one hand, is to address the mindsets of the locals, in particular in terms of their use of local resources and prioritizing local resources and being creative in how we use our local resources.
Okay, thank you very much. That gives us some insight into this question. It was a very specific question, and one needs to really, I can't remember in my days of looking at this question of tourism multiplier, if I ever really got a clear idea of what it is in these various countries. It requires a lot of technical compilation and data and so forth. Well, we have the question about leakage being answered. That is, there was a question to Dr. Lewis Cameron, and I think you have answered to some extent. There's the leakage of tourism from Ethan Blash. And then there's another question coming from Celeste Shariandi about the appropriate carrying capacity. What advice would be given to, I think this is to all the panelists, what advice would be given for popular tourism sites, like Pigeon Point, I think is mentioned as one, as I guess the idea is, as they say, not to kill the goose that lays the golden egg, to try to preserve the asset, without destroying it by tourism. So I don't know who would care to take on that particular, care to start us off on that. Yes, Oriana, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, let me just say, just in relation to linkages, one of the things we have found is that too often we look in the wrong place for linkages. We're looking for the physical things, the pots, the pans, the beds, and so, but one of the critical areas of linkages is the services that you can actually offer within the industry. So we have to look elsewhere if we really want to add value, and also very critically to increase the value of the tourism. With regard to, yes, really and truly, less is more. I don't know whether you've been hearing about the issue of over-tourism. In places like Venice, tourists go home. I think there needs to be a balance between what is optimal. And I think to some extent, I know Bermuda is one of the countries that they probably still charge $60 for the privilege of landing there, but they control their tourism and they ensure that it's not overcrowded and overloaded. And I think this is where we need to move away from the mass plenty tourism to quality. And this is why Dr. Hossain, this whole idea about moving from 400,000 to 2.6 million, let us not just look at numbers, but let us look at spending as well and the quality of it. I like the initiatives that Barbados is doing specifically with these green destinations and so. And when you really think about Trinidad, it's not just crime we have to solve, but we have to solve the environment. We don't care about the environment. We just treat it like rubbish. But do you know that today, the environment is one of the biggest industries? Let's start seeing the environment as an industry and cleaning it, solving it, and being part of a better solution. So I think unless we go into these kinds of directions, we will be losing it. So it's about quality rather than quantity. It's about controlling and really making that quality that's important. It's also important when we look at bringing tourists in, especially in the Trinidad case. Remember that you have a lot of other festivals besides Carnival. You have a lot of other stakeholders in those festivals. So why not partner with these stakeholders, these private sector people, and get more people coming in through those kinds of means instead of a generic kind of campaign? So I think that helps to answer some of the questions.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, indeed. Okay, well, we're aiming to try to finish by 8:30, and we don't have much time. I think there's a question, if I'm not wrong. And by the way, if anyone has a question, if your question was not answered, please raise your hand and you can ask the question. I'm seeing finally a question here from Mr. Wayne Calendar about the balance needed between capital costs necessary to provide the infrastructure, elevators, pumps, AC units, etc., needed to support tourism sector versus the cost of the operations, maintenance, and so forth. I don't know who would like to take a shot at that. I can't remember specifically if it was addressed by anyone, but if anyone has any insight into that, maybe they can share it with us. The capital cost necessary to provide the infrastructure versus the capital cost of the operations.
Can you hear me?
I'm not
looking at the costs in use and the life cycle costing of the infrastructure provided.
Yes. Yeah, it's a very technical question. I'm not sure how many.
All right, let me ask another question. I've not heard anything mentioned about tourism associated with retirement and social care. So for example, in the Philippines and Thailand and all those places, they have sort of cornered the market for the Scandinavian countries where they provide social care for the elderly. Because, for example, in the UK, if you have to go into a care home in the UK, you're looking at spending anywhere about £1,500 a month right? That's about 12,000 TT dollars a month for social care, right? Just for a bed and so on. And there's we need to look at retirement, not just for the residents in the country, but also as a means of earning foreign exchange, where people will come down for the winter retreat and be assured that they're going to be prepared, provided with quality social care in their retirement. So that's one of the, I haven't heard anything mentioned about that. And also, when we talk, looking at Professor Moore's model, one thing he did not mention is with a hurricane, particularly the countries that sit in the hurricane belt, it takes 25 years for the infrastructure, for them to get back to where they were before the hurricane. And that is if you know, very few people go to destination where they only seen the devastation. So that's one of the downside of being in the hurricane belt. And certainly Trinidad, Aruba, Curacao, Tobago have that sort of benefit of being below the hurricane belt and avoiding most of those kind of destructive natural forces. So those are some of the things that we need to look at when we're talking about tourism in Trinidad, at least I would say.
Yes.
And Chair,
thank you very much. Very interesting question. Let's say, because we are trying to wrap up, I want to ask each panelist to make some concluding remarks and answer these two questions when they're wrapping up. That is to say, the question about retirement, how could our tourism cater a bit more for retirees, and the question about hurricanes. So each person will take, starting, let's say, if we go in the reverse order. Roger, you want to comment on this?
Yes, no problem. So thanks. As just to backtrack a little in terms of the over tourism, when I looked at the numbers in terms, I use a basic index, tourist arrivals as a percentage of the population. Countries like Aruba is definitely off the radar. I mean, they are definitely seem to be over touristed, but we are very, very low down the ladder. And so it is in that regard, Oliana, that I started to look at some of the numbers in terms of expanding potential. In terms of retirement tourism, as you mentioned, I mean, any form of tourism we get in Trinidad and Tobago that can generate forex, I will be thankful. And definitely, given the demographics of the global economy, this type of retirement tourism linked to ecotourism and wellness tourism, particularly for Tobago, would have a lot of potential in my understanding of the facts. And so I think that's something we can definitely pursue, but in the context of what the three speakers besides me emphasize, in the context of fixing the institutions and improving the interlinkages and creating an understanding that tourism is everybody's business. I think that's just what we are lacking in this country. You know, it's always a perception that Manatee or Dragon Gas or some field would come on stream and bail us out. I can tell you from the little numbers that I know, that is not going to happen. So it's either no for tourism or, well, I don't want to mention some of the alternatives, so I will just say no. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Hossain. Dr. Lois Cameron, your concluding remarks?
Yes, so specifically in terms of the retirees, of course, the retirees.
Generally, in terms of what you would like to say, plus if you wish to address those two questions.
Right. So in terms of the retirees, I agree with Roger. This is a target group that Tobago certainly goes after because of the nature of their tourism experience, which is very much along the lines of wellness tourism. So it is a group that is on the radar, not necessarily for Trinidad. So recognizing that there is potential there. But general comment, I also want to come back to that point about tourism being everybody's business. And I think that traditionally we have used a very top-down approach to how we develop tourism in Trinidad. And I think going forward, we need to start to look at what the communities can offer in terms of that diversified experience and having everybody come on board. And I think, interestingly enough, that might be an approach that can assist us with the crime situation, because here's an opportunity for us to engage in what we call isolated marketing, where you can have persons experience the destination, but you guide that experience using safe zones, if you like. And we can identify communities that tourists can have a true Trini experience, if you like. And you know, once you in a community, you want to preserve your community. You want what is best for your community. You will look out for your community. And once you have all the persons involved, you stand a better chance of guarding against the criminal element in your community, as well as taking ownership of the tourism experience. And of course, it being a new product offering for the destination.
Very good. Thank you very much. Professor Moore, some concluding remarks?
Yeah, I just want to pick up on something that the speaker would have said. So he spoke about the potential of health tourism. And I think this is a really good adaptation to climate change. Remember, climate change is going to make tourism a lot less attractive to the traditional sun, sea, and sand. But there are other aspects of tourism that we could also build on, such as edutourism, heritage tourism. Trinidad knows a lot about cultural tourism. I mean, everybody knows about the festival and carnival in Trinidad. You can build a tourism product around that, and you already have. You can also build, use the environment to build out your tourism product as well. So these are all nice adaptation mechanisms to climate change. And I just want to add one other thing as well too. In relation to hurricanes, one of the things that we are seeing is that with hurricanes is making ensuring our tourism assets a lot more difficult. And even if a hurricane doesn't impact on, say, Trinidad and Tobago, if it impacts on Jamaica or Barbados, it still makes it more expensive to insure your tourism assets in Trinidad and Tobago, because the insurers see the Caribbean as one single product. They really don't differentiate between the islands. So that is also something that we're going to have to deal with in the future as a result of climate change.
Thank you very much. Dr. Poon, some concluding remarks here.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think, first of all, we really need to really rethink what this tourism business is about. Firstly, I think we need to look at public-private community partnerships in terms of building a more sustainable tourism. And I think we basically need to work together. There are many segments of the industry, whether it's health, wellness, tourism, that are generating a lot of wealth. And I think we really need to seriously go with it. We are missing the boat, but I guess it's not too late. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I want to, on behalf of TEDU, to thank all of you for presenting here tonight. I think we have had a very interesting discussion. One could just see from the questions asked that people were very motivated by what was said. It's a pity we don't have more time to answer a lot of these questions. But the aim, I guess, tonight was just to start the discussion. I hope we can continue at some later stage. I think we have learned a lot. At least I personally, I am not a specialist in this area, but I dabble a bit and so on. And I've come out here this evening and I've learned quite a bit. So let me thank Roger a lot and this unit for organizing this. Let me in particular thank Rebecca Gookool-Bosland, as well as Mark Rupchan, for organizing this and allowing us to have this discussion with you. And once again, to thank all of you presenters, and let's hope that we can do this again sometime next year. And please enjoy your Christmas and have a happy New Year. All the best.